At my granddaughter's baby shower, I heard, "She has nothing to offer." When I opened my purse, I pulled out the letter authorizing the baby's lifetime health insurance plan. "Your presence here means so much to me. Watch until the end and leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far my story has reached." I straightened my simple floral dress one last time before ringing the doorbell. At 61, I'd learned that some battles weren't worth fighting, like my daughter-in-law Vanessa insisting the baby shower be held at her friend Melissa's McMansion instead of my cozy home where I'd prepared everything. "Mom, you're here." Steve greeted me with a quick hug that barely made contact. My son had mastered the art of acknowledging me without actually embracing me. "Of course I am," I smiled, clutching my modest gift bag. Wouldn't miss it for the world. The living room was transformed into a pink and gold wonderland. Crystal champagne flutes, artisanal pastries, and arrangements of peonies that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Women in designer outfits clustered in groups, their laughter tinkling like the expensive wind chimes hanging on Melissa's patio. "Cheryl, you made it." Vanessa approached, her baby bump draped in a silk maternity dress. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "You found the place okay?" "I did," I nodded, handing her the gift bag. "A little something for the baby." "How sweet," she said, setting it aside without looking inside. "There's punch over there. Help yourself." I watched her glide back to her friends, the daughters of doctors and executives, women who'd never worked a day in their lives. Not like me, who'd spent 30 years as a nurse, working double shifts after Frank died to put Steve through college. Throughout the afternoon, I tried to join conversations, offering advice about diaper rash or sharing the snickerdoodle recipe that used to be Steve's favorite. But each time, the women would nod politely, then turn away, closing their circle. During lunch, I found myself at the far end of the table, between Vanessa's second cousin and the caterer's assistant. I didn't mind, I've never needed to be the center of attention. But I couldn't help noticing how Steve kept glancing at me nervously, as if worried I might embarrass him. The real moment came during the gift opening. Vanessa cooed over designer baby clothes, a custom-made crib, and a stroller that cost more than my first car. Each gift was met with appropriate gasps and applause. When she reached for my small package, I saw the slight tightening of her lips. Inside was a hand-knitted baby blanket, cream-colored with delicate pink roses, that had taken me 3 months to complete. "Oh, it's homemade," she said, holding it up briefly before setting it aside. "Very crafty." That's when I heard it. Vanessa leaned toward her friend Jessica and whispered, "That's Steve's mom. Sweet lady, but she doesn't have much to offer." Jessica glanced at me with pity in her eyes. At least she tried. Their words hit me like a physical blow. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, the same hands that had changed Steve's diapers, worked 12-hour hospital shifts, and signed second mortgage papers to pay for his education. Something shifted inside me at that moment. Not anger, I'm too old for tantrums. Something quieter, more resolute. I reached for my purse, the worn leather one Frank had given me on our 10th anniversary. While Vanessa unwrapped another extravagant gift, I pulled out an envelope and walked slowly to where she sat. "I almost forgot," I said, my voice steady despite the heaviness in my chest. "This is my real gift for the baby." Vanessa looked up, confused, as I handed her the envelope. She opened it casually, then froze. Her perfectly manicured fingers trembled slightly as she read the letter inside. "This is..." she stammered, looking up at me with wide eyes. "A lifetime health insurance policy for the baby," I finished for her. "Premium coverage, no deductibles, guaranteed regardless of pre-existing conditions. It's paid in full." The room fell silent. Every eye was on us. "But this must have cost..." Vanessa couldn't finish the sentence. "Most of my retirement savings," I said simply. "But what's money compared to my granddaughter's security?" Steve stepped forward, his face pale. "Mom, you can't afford this." "I've made my decision," I replied, meeting his gaze directly for the first time in years. Some things are worth sacrificing for. I turned and walked back to my seat, feeling the weight of their stares. Nobody whispered anymore. Nobody pitied me. But the satisfaction I expected didn't come. Instead, I felt a profound sadness washing over me. Because in that moment of vindication, I realized just how little they really knew me, and how much I had allowed myself to become invisible. I couldn't sleep that night. The ceiling fan in my bedroom made the same gentle whirring sound it had for the past 15 years, but my mind refused to quiet down. I kept replaying the shocked expressions, the sudden shift from dismissal to uncomfortable respect. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, just a hollow ache where something warmer should have been. At 2 a.m., I got up and made myself some chamomile tea. The house felt especially empty tonight. I wandered into the small second bedroom I'd kept ready for Steve all these years, though he hadn't stayed overnight since college. Running my fingers along the baseball trophies still displayed on the shelf, I thought about how quickly 28 years had passed. Frank died when Steve was just 8. Cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to funeral. I still remember the bewildered look in my son's eyes at the service, his small hand clutching mine as people offered condolences neither of us knew how to accept. "We'll be okay, buddy," I'd promised him that night, though I had no idea how I'd keep that promise. A nurse's salary doesn't stretch far when you're suddenly a single parent with a mortgage and medical bills. I picked up the framed photo from Steve's nightstand, him at 10, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a science fair ribbon. What followed that picture were years of sacrifices neither of us fully understood at the time. I worked double shifts at the hospital, sometimes triples during flu season. Weekends, holidays, overnight rotations, I took them all. There were neighbor ladies who helped watch Steve, Mrs. Rivera next door who made sure he ate dinner on the nights I couldn't be home. School events I missed. Soccer games I arrived at just as they were ending, still in my scrubs, apologizing while Steve pretended it didn't matter. But we made it work. I packed his lunches with little notes inside. Helped with homework in the early morning hours before my shifts. Somehow found money for his class trips and college application fees. When he got into state university with a partial scholarship, I remortgaged the house to cover the rest. "Your education is the most important investment," I told him. "Your dad would have wanted this." He thrived in college, made the dean's list, joined a prestigious fraternity, found his path in business management. I saw him less and less, but that was normal, I told myself. He was growing up, finding his own way. Then he met Vanessa during his senior year. The daughter of a real estate developer, she had the kind of polished confidence that comes from never having to wonder if a bill could be paid. Their relationship moved quickly. The first time Steve brought her home, I spent days cleaning, cooking, trying to make our modest house presentable. Vanessa was polite but distant, her eyes taking in the worn furniture, the outdated kitchen. "You have a lovely home," she said, in a tone that conveyed the opposite. I watched Steve during that dinner, noticed how he became someone else around her, laughing too loudly at her jokes, apologizing for things that didn't need apologies, constantly checking her reactions. After they left, I found my favorite serving dish, the one Frank's mother had given us as a wedding present, in the kitchen trash. When I asked Steve about it later, he shrugged uncomfortably. "Vanessa thought it looked kind of old-fashioned." "She didn't mean anything by it, Mom." It was the first compromise, but not the last. Soon he was too busy for our Sunday phone calls. Holiday visits became shorter, more strained. He changed how he dressed, how he spoke. The son who once proudly told hospital colleagues I was the best nurse in the pediatric ward now introduced me vaguely as my mom, with no elaboration. Their wedding was an elaborate affair at a country club I'd never set foot in before. I wore a dress that cost more than I usually spent on clothes in a year, but still somehow felt underdressed. I was seated at a table far from the main party, with distant relatives Vanessa had never met but who fit better into the aesthetic she wanted. Afterward, they bought a house in Lakewood Heights, the kind of neighborhood where lawn care services were mandatory and everyone drove European cars. I was invited over less and less. When they announced the pregnancy, I was overjoyed. A grandchild, a new beginning, perhaps. I offered to help prepare the nursery, to share what I knew from decades of pediatric nursing. Vanessa politely declined each offer. "We've hired a designer who specializes in nurseries," she explained. "And we've already chosen a doula and pediatrician recommended by my mother's friends." So I channeled my excitement into making the blanket, into setting aside most of my modest savings for the health insurance policy. Because that's what mothers do, we keep giving, even when the giving hurts. The teacup in my hands had gone cold. I looked around the quiet house, at the life I'd built, at all the evidence of love that had somehow become invisible to the people who mattered most. Tomorrow, Steve would call. He'd be uncomfortable, torn between gratitude for the insurance and embarrassment at how I'd been treated. Vanessa would send a formal thank you note, perfectly worded and completely empty. And things would go back to the way they were. Or would they? Something had shifted inside me at that baby shower. A realization that had been building for years had finally crystallized. I deserved better. Setting down the cold tea, I made a decision. Tomorrow wouldn't be like all the yesterdays that came before. Tomorrow, I would start writing a different story. Steve called the next day, just as I predicted. I was in my garden, tending to my tomato plants, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Mom?" His voice carried that familiar mix of obligation and discomfort. "About yesterday. Beautiful weather today, isn't it?" I replied, brushing soil from my hands. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely." A pause. "Mom, we need to talk about the insurance policy." I straightened up, feeling a twinge in my lower back. At 61, gardening reminded me daily of my age in ways my nursing career hadn't prepared me for. "What about it?" I asked. "You can't afford that. It's too much." His voice dropped. "Vanessa and I appreciate the gesture, but we can't accept it." I smiled to myself. Of course they couldn't. Accepting would mean acknowledging the depth of my sacrifice, and the shallowness of their treatment. "The policy is in the baby's name, not yours," I said calmly. "It's non-transferable and already paid in full. There's nothing to accept or decline." Another pause. I could almost hear him calculating his next approach. "Look, Mom," he finally said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he developed since marrying Vanessa. "I know things were a little awkward yesterday." Were they? I continued deadheading my marigolds, phone pressed between ear and shoulder. "Vanessa feels terrible about how everything went down. She's just been so emotional with the pregnancy." I closed my eyes briefly. The excuses were as predictable as sunset. "Steve," I said quietly, "does Vanessa actually feel terrible, or did you tell her she should?" "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm 61 years old. I've spent my life caring for others, first as a nurse, then as your mother. I think I've earned the right to be spoken to honestly." He sighed heavily. "Mom, can we just move past this? Vanessa's planning a dinner next week. Just the three of us. To thank you properly." I stood up, knees cracking slightly, and looked around my modest garden. The rose bushes Frank had planted 20 years ago. The bird bath where generations of robins had taught their young to drink. The bench where I'd sat countless evenings alone, watching the sunset, missing my husband and later, missing my son. "No," I said. "What?" "No, I won't be coming to dinner." My voice was calm but firm. "Please thank Vanessa for the invitation, but I'm going to decline." "Mom, don't be difficult. She's trying to make amends." "Is she?" I asked. "Or are you trying to smooth things over so you don't have to feel uncomfortable?" The silence confirmed what I already knew. "I'm not being difficult, Steve. I'm being honest. Yesterday made something very clear to me. I've spent years trying to fit into your new life, accepting last-minute cancellations, pretending not to notice when you're embarrassed by my clothes or my house. Making myself smaller so I wouldn't inconvenience you and Vanessa. That's not fair," he protested weakly. "Maybe not. But it's true. I looked up at the clear blue sky. I don't want a thank you dinner where we'll make polite conversation and pretend everything's fine. What I want is respect. And if I can't have that, then I'd rather have my dignity and my solitude. Steve's voice turned frustrated. So what, you're just going to cut us off? Your own family? Your grandchild? The question stung, but I held my ground. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'll always be here for you and for my granddaughter. But from now on, it will be on terms that honor who I am, not just what I can provide. Mom, this is ridiculous. If this is about what Vanessa said. It's not just about what she said, I interrupted gently. It's about what you didn't say. What you haven't said for years. The line went quiet again. I love you, Steve. That will never change. But I need some time to myself now. I ended the call before he could respond, before my resolve could weaken. My hands trembled slightly as I set the phone down on the garden bench. For a moment, I just stood there, surrounded by the plants I'd nurtured, feeling strangely light despite the heaviness in my heart. The silence in the garden wasn't empty, it was full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to imagine for decades. That evening, as I sat on my porch with a glass of lemonade, my phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Steve, then from Vanessa. I let them go unanswered. Not out of spite, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was listening to my own voice instead. And it was telling me that sometimes, healing begins with silence. 2 weeks passed without returning Steve's calls. I wasn't punishing him, I was honoring the promise I'd made to myself. The first few days were the hardest. I'd reach for the phone instinctively whenever it rang, my heart racing with a mixture of hope and dread. But each time, I reminded myself to breathe, to wait, to respect my own boundaries. On a Tuesday morning, I drove to the Oak Ridge Community Center with butterflies in my stomach. The flyer I'd seen at the grocery store had caught my eye: Silver Artists, beginners painting class for seniors. Back in college, before nursing school and marriage and motherhood, I'd taken a few art classes. Nothing serious, just enough to know I enjoyed the feeling of a brush in my hand. First time, asked a woman about my age with short silver hair and bright turquoise earrings. Her smile was warm and immediate. That obvious, huh? I laughed nervously, clutching my newly purchased set of watercolors. I'm Eleanor, she said, extending her hand. I was terrified my first day too. 3 years ago, after my Harry passed. By the end of the 2-hour class, my shoulders had relaxed, and my amateur painting of a sunset, wobbly and oversaturated, had earned encouraging comments from the instructor. But more importantly, I'd laughed with Eleanor and 2 other women who invited me to join them for coffee afterward. Same time next week? Eleanor asked as we parted. I nodded, feeling something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not the sharp pang of missing Steve or the dull ache of loneliness, but a gentle warmth of possibility. Over the next few weeks, Tuesdays became the highlight of my week. I added a Thursday pottery class, then a Saturday morning walking group. My refrigerator door, once covered with Steve's childhood drawings and later bare, now displayed my own artwork, imperfect but improving. My kitchen table, which had rarely seen visitors, now regularly hosted Eleanor and our growing circle of friends for potluck dinners and card games. One evening, as I was cleaning my brushes after working on a landscape painting at home, my phone rang. Steve's name flashed on the screen. After a month of silence, his call sent a jolt through me. I took a deep breath and answered. Mom? His voice was tentative, as if speaking to a stranger. Are you okay? I've been worried. I'm fine, Steve, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. How are you? How's Vanessa? She's 8 months now. The doctor says everything looks good. He paused. Mom, why haven't you called back? It's been weeks. I looked down at my paint-stained fingers, at the canvas drying on my easel. I needed some time. I told you that. But a month? Without even checking in? The hurt in his voice was genuine, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of guilt. "We thought you were sick or something." "I'm sorry you were worried," I said softly. "But I'm doing well. Really well, actually." "What does that mean?" I told him about my classes, about Eleanor, about rediscovering parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. As I spoke, I realized how much my world had expanded in just a few weeks. "That's good, I guess," he said, sounding confused. "But what about the baby?" "The shower was a mess, I know, but she's still your granddaughter. Don't you want to be involved?" "Of course I do," I said. I never said I didn't want to be in her life. I just needed to find my own life first. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we'd never said. "Vanessa had her final ultrasound yesterday," he finally offered. "They confirmed it's definitely a girl. We're naming her Lily." "That's beautiful," I said, meaning it. "Mom," he hesitated, then pushed forward. "I need to ask you something. And I want you to be honest." I set down my brush. "Always. The things you said before, about feeling small, about us not respecting you. Is that really how you felt all these years?" The question hung in the air, heavier than I expected. For a moment, I considered softening the truth, falling back into old patterns of protecting his feelings above my own. "Yes," I said simply. "It is." He exhaled sharply. "I never meant to make you feel that way." "I know you didn't, sweetheart. But intentions and impact are different things." Another long pause. "Vanessa is throwing a dinner party next weekend. For her hospital colleagues. Would you want to come?" "Not as a server or babysitter," he added quickly. "As my mom. Our family." I thought about it, pictured myself in Vanessa's immaculate dining room, among her curated friends. A month ago, I would have accepted immediately, grateful for any inclusion. Now, I weighed the invitation against my Thursday pottery showcase. "I'm afraid I have plans that night," I said. "But thank you for asking. Maybe another time?" The shift was subtle but significant. My plans mattered now. My time had value. "Oh." I could hear the surprise in his voice. "Yeah, sure. Another time." After we hung up, I returned to my painting, adding depth to the horizon with gentle strokes. The canvas was taking shape, becoming something uniquely mine. Just like my life. That night, I dreamt of Lily, a little girl with Steve's curious eyes and, perhaps, something of my spirit. In my dream, I showed her how to mix colors, how to find beauty in imperfection. I woke with tears on my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in years, I was excited about what tomorrow might bring. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in April. I fumbled for my phone in the darkness, my heart instantly alert in the way only a nurse's can be after decades of emergency calls. "Mom." Steve's voice was tight with panic. "Vanessa's in labor. There are complications." I sat up immediately. "What kind of complications?" Her blood pressure dropped suddenly. "They're talking about an emergency C-section." The facade of control he'd maintained for years had crumbled. This was my son, scared and reaching for his mother. "Can you come? Please?" 20 minutes later, I was pulling into the hospital parking lot, my windshield wipers fighting against the downpour. The grand entrance of Lakewood Memorial, where Vanessa had insisted on delivering at considerable extra cost, glowed like a beacon in the pre-dawn darkness. The maternity ward was a flurry of hushed urgency. I found Steve pacing in a private waiting room, his face ashen. "They took her in 10 minutes ago," he said, running his hands through his hair. Something about fetal distress. The baby's heart rate kept dropping. I guided him to a chair, the roles of parent and child momentarily restored to their original order. "Breathe, Steve. She's in good hands." For the next hour, we waited together, the silence between us filled with the steady tick of the wall clock and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Steve clutched my hand like he used to during thunderstorms as a child. Neither of us mentioned the weeks of silence or the tension that had grown between us. In crisis, such things seem trivial. Finally, a doctor appeared, still in surgical scrubs. Steve jumped to his feet. "Mr. Harrison? Your wife is stable. We had to perform an emergency cesarean, but she's recovering well." "And the baby?" Steve's voice cracked. The doctor's expression softened. "Your daughter is beautiful, but she's experiencing some respiratory distress, not uncommon with emergency deliveries. We've moved her to the NICU for observation." "Can I see them?" Steve asked. "Your wife is in recovery. You can see her shortly. As for the baby, the NICU team will update you soon." With a reassuring nod, the doctor left. Steve collapsed back into his chair, relief and new worry battling across his face. I sat quietly beside him, offering silent support. When a nurse came to take him to Vanessa, he hesitated. "Mom, will you?" "I'll wait right here," I promised. Alone in the waiting room, I closed my eyes, offering silent prayers for my granddaughter. As a pediatric nurse, I'd seen countless babies overcome difficult starts. Still, knowledge didn't ease the worry. Another hour passed before Steve returned, looking exhausted but calmer. "Vanessa's sleeping. They gave her something for the pain." He sat heavily beside me. "The NICU doctor just spoke with me. Lily's lungs aren't fully mature. They're starting her on a special medication, but she might need more intensive treatment." I nodded, understanding the implications immediately. The surfactant therapy. It usually works very well. Steve looked at me in surprise, as if suddenly remembering my decades of nursing experience, something he'd been almost embarrassed by in recent years. "Can babies die from this?" he asked, his voice small. I took his hand. "Most babies respond very well to treatment. And Lily has excellent care." He nodded, seemingly comforted by my certainty. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "I'm sorry, Mom." "For what, sweetheart?" "For everything. For how we've treated you. His voice caught, for forgetting who you are. What you know. What you've done for me." I squeezed his hand, too moved to speak. When the doctor was explaining Lily's condition, all I could think was, I wish Mom was here to translate all this medical jargon. And then I realized, you were sitting right outside, probably understanding everything better than I ever could. The admission hung between us, weighted with years of unspoken hurt. All those years of raising me alone, working at the hospital, dealing with emergencies far worse than this. I've never really acknowledged what that took, have I? I smiled softly. You were busy building your own life. That's no excuse. He looked directly at me, really seeing me perhaps for the first time in years. When I saw Vanessa today, so vulnerable, it hit me what it must have been like for you. Raising me alone after Dad died. No partner to hold your hand in waiting rooms. I managed, I said simply. You more than managed. You were incredible. He paused. And then I helped make you invisible. The truth of his words washed over us both. In the sterile hospital waiting room, with rain pattering against the windows and worry for Lily binding us together, something long broken between us began, cautiously, to mend. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Harrison? Your daughter is stabilizing nicely. Would you like to see her? Steve stood, then turned to me. Mom, will you come with me? I think Lily should meet her grandmother. The real you. Together, we walked toward the NICU, towards Lily, towards a new understanding that neither of us had seen coming just 12 hours before. 6 months passed like waves on a shore, each one bringing small changes, reshaping the landscape between us bit by bit. Lily thrived despite her dramatic entrance into the world. After 5 tense days in the NICU, she came home with a clean bill of health and a powerful set of lungs that announced her needs without hesitation. I hadn't moved back into my old role. Instead, we built something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. I visited twice a week on my own terms, bringing my watercolor supplies sometimes to capture Lily's changing expressions while Steve or Vanessa held her. Today was Lily's half-birthday, marked by a small, intimate gathering. No extravagant decorations, no performance for social media. Just cake and genuine smiles in the sunlit nursery that had once been off-limits to my suggestions. "She has your eyes," Vanessa said quietly as she handed Lily to me. The statement hung in the air between us, significant not for its accuracy. Lily's eyes were clearly Steve's, but for the acknowledgement it represented. I settled into the rocking chair, cradling my granddaughter against my chest. At 6 months, she was alert and curious, reaching for my silver necklace with determined fingers. "Careful there, little explorer," I laughed, gently redirecting her grasp to the soft stuffed rabbit I'd brought. Vanessa leaned against the doorframe, watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gone were the designer outfits and perfect makeup. Motherhood had softened her edges, replaced her careful facade with something more authentic. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "For the insurance." I glanced up, surprised by the directness. "You don't need to." "I do." She stepped into the room, sitting on the ottoman near my feet. When Lily was in the NICU, the bills started coming immediately. Even with Steve's company insurance, we were looking at thousands in out-of-pocket costs. I nodded, keeping my eyes on Lily's perfect face. I didn't need to remind Vanessa that the policy I'd established covered everything the hospital's financial office had initially tried to bill them for. "But it's not just about the money." Vanessa's voice wavered slightly. "When you gave that gift, I thought you were just trying to show us up, to make me look bad." "That wasn't." "I know that now," she interrupted. "But I didn't then." I couldn't understand why someone would give so much without expecting something in return. She looked down at her hands. "That says more about me than it does about you." Lily cooed softly, nestling against my shoulder. I inhaled the sweet baby scent of her hair, letting the moment stretch between us. "We all see the world through the lens of our own experiences," I said finally. "I never had much to give except love and support. You grew up differently." Vanessa nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "When I was in recovery, drifting in and out of consciousness, I heard Steve talking to you in the hallway. About your nursing career. All those years of knowledge and experience." She looked up at me. "I had reduced you to just Steve's mom in my mind. I never bothered to see the whole person." The admission wasn't easy for her, I could see that. Vanessa had spent a lifetime constructing an image of perfect control. Vulnerability didn't come naturally. "Anyway," she continued, wiping her cheek quickly, "I just wanted you to know that I see you now. And I'm sorry it took a crisis for that to happen." Before I could respond, Steve appeared in the doorway with a small cake adorned with a 6 months candle. "Are we ready for the celebration?" he asked, then paused, sensing the emotional undercurrent in the room. "Everything okay in here?" "Everything's perfect," I said, meaning it. Later, as Steve walked me to my car, the evening air warm around us, he took my hand. "You know, Mom, Vanessa has been talking about redoing the guest room. Making it into a proper space for you, for when you want to stay over." He hesitated. "If you want to, that is." I squeezed his hand. "That's thoughtful. But you know I value my independence these days. My house is still home." He nodded, understanding in his eyes where once there might have been hurt or frustration. "I thought you might say that. Just know the option's there." We reached my car, the same reliable sedan I'd driven for years. Steve leaned against it, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said. "About what he would think of Lily. Of me. Of how I treated you after he was gone." "He would adore Lily," I said softly. "And he would be proud of the father you're becoming." "Just the father?" I smiled. "And the son. The man you're growing into, someone who can admit mistakes, who can see beyond himself. That takes courage." He looked down, emotion crossing his face. I have a good example to follow. We embraced, a real hug this time, not the perfunctory touch he'd offered at the baby shower that felt like a lifetime ago. Driving home, I felt a sense of completion I hadn't experienced in years. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't. Vanessa still occasionally slipped into her old patterns. Steve sometimes forgot our new boundaries. I still had moments of doubt and hurt. But we were building something authentic together, something that honored who we each were rather than who we thought we should be. At home, I poured a glass of wine and carried it to my studio, the spare bedroom I'd converted with Eleanor's help. My latest painting sat on the easel, nearly finished, Lily sleeping in dappled sunlight, my hand cradling her tiny foot. Beside it stood the first awkward sunset I'd painted in class, a reminder of how far I'd come. I touched the canvas gently, adding a highlight to Lily's cheek. The painting wasn't just of my granddaughter, it was of my own hand too, weathered and strong, visible and necessary. I had spent decades making myself smaller, believing that maternal love meant self-erasure. Now I understood that the greatest gift I could give Lily, and Steve, and even Vanessa, was to be fully myself, artist, nurse, mother, woman. The silent gift hadn't been the insurance policy after all. It had been the awakening that followed, the quiet reclamation of my own worth. And that was a gift that would keep giving, to all of us, for years to come.